Okay, interviewing Bob Freedman, who was. Were you CEO of the Federation at the time, or it was Winnipeg Jewish Community Council when,
Correct.
and you were
That
the
was called.
executive
We changed the
director?
name at around the year 2000 or something. But
Yeah.
so here's the story,
Hmm.
such as it is. Um, I was pretty active um, back in the late 70s, early 80s. I was the chair of the Budget and Allocations Committee at the Community Council. And then I was a senior vice president, which meant I would have been the president of the WJCC. And around the time that the executive director, Izzy Peltz, was retiring.
Hmm.
Okay, so Izzy was also, by the way, the executive director of the Jewish
Yeah,
Foundation.
the Jewish Foundation.
Okay,
Yeah.
it was a part-time job.
Yeah.
Okay, at that time, and during that time, and even before, and I was even before I was on the board of the WJCC, I was involved with B'nai B'rith. There was always talk in the community about people would say we're going to build a new Y, we're going to build a new high school, we're going to. That was at the time when the demographics of the community was sort of going south, but had been going south for 20 years. My brother left Winnipeg in 1969. A lot of his friends went to California. Then people started going to Toronto, then Vancouver. And even parents were encouraging their kids to leave Winnipeg in terms of, if there's a future. And a lot of that was not the Jewish community per se, it was Winnipeg. Right? We were the third largest city in Canada, and we woke up one morning, we were the eighth largest city in Canada. Okay? So the economy was the primary factor, and therefore opportunities, to encourage young people to leave. Okay?
Yeah.
And as a result, there was a sense of there was no future. Our infrastructure was decaying, so what? What's the big deal? Okay? So from time to time, when there was, well, we're going to build a new Y, whatever, there was, people were like,
But
yeah, sure.
so let's try and pin it down because
Yeah.
what I read, it really started around 1985.
No, but so
This is
I'm
even
leading up
before
to,
that?
I'm leading up to how
Because the Y was only 20 years old in the
the Y's
70s.
opened in 1950
52.
something. So
That-
it was more of a case. Remember, it became a little bit more concerning for some parents in terms of the general, population north of Ellis and downtown Winnipeg.
Mhm.
So it was concerned about safety issues, whatever. There was more an issue about the infrastructure on Matheson than there was necessarily on Hargrave, because as you said, it was only 30 some odd years old, the Y.
Mhm.
Okay? But it was more of there was no plan to do anything.
Mhm.
And people weren't stupid. So even though they heard things or they were involved, whether with an organization or whatever, just loose talk, and nothing really concrete happening. Okay? And it was obvious that if this continued for a number of years, with young people continuing to leave and whatever, who knows what would be going forward. Okay? So it was kind of frustrating having sitting in a board meetings. The frustration level was really high. Okay. Anyway, Izzy was retiring, and they were advertising for a replacement, and some good people applied. Um, I didn't apply. I was the executive director of Legal Aid Manitoba. Okay,
Mhm.
and yeah, and I was approached by the then president, Mendel Meltzer,
Mhm.
and he took me out for a lovely lunch, and he tried to encourage me to throw my hat in the ring. Okay,
Mhm.
and I said to him, I said, look, the only way I would consider doing that is if there was a commitment by the leadership of the WJCC to move the community forward. I had no intention of being a caretaker on a sinking ship. Okay, and two, that if they didn't interfere, they gave me the authority to do things. I wasn't sure what what to do, and if it required spending money, clearly I would need board approval, and I'd be accountable to the board. I didn't want board interference. I didn't want board members coming into the office like they used to and bossing people around. Okay, um, and if they want to continue to do that, that's fine. as long as we understand that to me are the key elements. It wasn't salary, by the way. I think I started at the same level I was being paid at legal aid. Okay. Anyway, I guess they were desperate. Okay, so they hired me.
And this is in the early 80s?
This was 1986.
86. Okay.
1986.
Yeah.
I was hired in March of 1986 with a start date of May 1. Okay? When I told my dad that I was leaving legal aid, a government job, okay? He didn't know that it was an order and counsel appointment, could have been revoked in 24 hours, but I didn't explain that to him. He looked at me and he said, "Are you crazy?" Okay? Right? You're leaving the security of a government position with a good pension to work for the Jewish community. And he probably had a good point. Okay? So here it was, March. Now I said, holy shit, now what do I do? Okay? So I contacted what was then called the Council of Jewish Federations, now the Jewish Federations of North America in New York. And I made arrangements to go to New York, by the way, on my own dime. I went to New York, and I spent a day or so with people in their planning department. And
this is where you probably hear about Gary Tobin.
Wait a minute. And then I explained about Winnipeg, our demographic issue, and blah, 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 blah. And I said, look, I've been involved for a long time, but I've never worked as a community professional. I started May 1. What the hell do I do? And they said, well, there's a social demographer at Brandeis. His name is Gary Tobin. Okay? And he's gone to a number of communities, and maybe, he could be helpful. Here's his contact information. Okay. So I contacted Gary Tobin and again explained, my situation in Winnipeg and whatever. And I sort of said, maybe you can come. I would try to get some people together, leaders of the community. And he said, well, what do you want me to do? And I said, I want you to come and kick ass. Okay? We need to motivate people to get off their ass and actually do something. He said, okay, but I don't want to do a generic presentation. Just send me as much data and information as you can about Winnipeg. And your job is to make sure that there's people in the room, obviously. So I started May the 1st. Gary Tobin came on May the 2nd.
Oh.
Okay? There was a room full of people. I don't know, I can't even recall how I managed to convince people to come, but I can't remember who the people were other than one of them was Marjorie Blankstein.
Yeah.
Okay? And I noticed during Gary's, and Gary said, by the way, you're still bigger than 2/3 of the communities in North America, even though your population has declined. Stop moping and groaning. I'll come back if you want and work with you in developing a strategic plan going forward, okay? And you have a responsibility. You owe it. That's part of your job, is to plan for the future, not just sit back and do nothing. So he did kick a little ass, okay? And Marjorie was sitting there enthralled. She had that look on her face. So afterwards, there was, of course, coffee and cookies, naturally. So I approached her. I said, Marjorie, you'd be the perfect chair of our long-range planning committee. And she agreed right on the spot, actually. She didn't need any convincing. And that was May 2nd, 1986. Okay? And we then started the process. We didn't recruit Sheldon, by the way, Sheldon Burney, until a few years later.
So I understand.
Marjorie and I did we engaged Touche Ross, now Deloitte, to do a need study in the community. By the way, they botched it badly. And their senior partner from Toronto had to come into Winnipeg to salvage the report, but that's a side issue. And we then, and I remember Marjorie saying at our first meeting that, in terms we had to establish our goals and objectives, we didn't talk about campuses or buildings. We didn't even know what a campus was. It was a university. What do you mean a campus? Our first goal was to reestablish pride in the community. That was our first goal. Okay? So Marjorie and I then spent 2.5 years on a dog and pony show. We would go to board meetings, sometimes uninvited, okay, to any organization, Israel-based, women's organizations, big meetings, small meetings, made no difference. We wanted to engage as many people in the community and talk about, we didn't have a preconceived plan yet, but we said we're working on a plan. We want your engagement, your input, your involvement. This is the future of our community. Just as a story, Bernie, we had to show you, Marjorie felt we had to touch base with everybody. So we had a meeting with the leaders of the Ashkenazi synagogue. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was bar mitzvah to the Ashkenazi,
Mm-hmm.
but I hadn't really been back in years. So who were the leaders? The Silverberg brothers and one other guy, I can't remember who it was. And Marjorie and I went there.
These are the three Bachelor brothers.
The two bachelors.
Two bachelors.
Bachelors and one other guy who I can't remember. There were three of them.
Yeah.
And Marjorie made a presentation like she was presenting to the Winnipeg Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And they were looking at us like they didn't have a fucking clue what we were talking about. They didn't have a clue. Until finally, she finished. And finally, one of the Silverberg brothers said, you know, you've been doing a terrible job running the community. We suggest you turn it over to the Orthodox. We'll do a much better job. So Marjorie said she didn't really have the authority to. Okay? Then he says, by the way, I would like to sell you a membership in the shul.
to Marjorie.
And to me.
And to you.
Okay. For $18, you can be a member, and that includes seats for Yom Tov. So I said, wow, that is the best deal in town. You know, I had a $20 bill.
Yeah.
And I became a member, okay,
Yeah.
of the Ashkenazi with one seat for Yom Tov. That was kind of a funny story, but it demonstrated our commitment to engage the entire community, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a long process. We didn't, we then realized, we knew, and by the way, there were two elements to this. One was reestablishing credibility, okay? So we were developing a plan as opposed to, oh, we're gonna do something, but nothing happened. So we had to establish credibility. We wanted to, as I said, engage everybody so that there would be buy-in from as many elements of the community as possible. This is really important. But we also recognized, and we knew that we had no direct control over the economy of Winnipeg, so we kept our fingers crossed. That was the time that Izzy Asper was making a commitment to keep his businesses in Winnipeg as opposed to moving to Toronto. And that, by the way, led to other positive decisions by business leaders here to start turning our economy around. But we knew we had to address a demographic issue, okay? And when we started to talk about a new building, then buildings became the campus, okay? We said that we would use that as a potential marketing ploy. First of all, it was a public statement to our community.
Do you know? Gary Tobin himself didn't come up with the idea, or he?
No.
So
Gary,
where did the idea of the campus come from?
He told us about many,
Because I was reading a history and
yeah, he told us about what was happening in other communities. And we were not unique.
Mm-hmm.
Other communities were dealing with assimilation or whatever, especially in the States. Okay, and he mentioned, by the way, Kansas City. They had just opened a new campus in Kansas City, and he mentioned other places as well. And when we were ready to focus on the campus or buildings, we made arrangements to visit Kansas City. But in doing so, we had already approached Sheldon Burney. And by
Tell me something about Sheldon Burney, though,
Yeah.
because he's a guy who just had no background in the Jewish community
Exactly.
that I can know of.
well, it was his father was involved. Okay, Martin Burney.
And Ada Burney
Okay,
is
Ada,
the name.
Ada was okay, but it was more
Martin Burney.
than Ada. Okay, and I'd only met Sheldon once or twice. Okay, and he was busy running the business. So
What was the business?
it was called Reliance Products. They made plastics and plastic containers and whatever.
Yeah,
And they
okay.
sold the business. And Sheldon at that time was in his 50s and was basically retired.
Oh,
So, even though he was not that well known in the community, he had good relationships with people like Izzy Asper and others. Okay, they because he went to Florida and they schmoozed around and socialized and whatever. Okay, and we figured also he had credibility. At least he had business credibility, and he had time on his hands. Okay, so we approached him, and and we briefed him, and we tried to convince him that we would need someone like him to be involved.
what, I just want to know, because in terms of how it was done, was it a small nucleus of people who were really the movers and shakers on this? Because you had committees,
To be honest with you, initially, and we started, we formed what is called the Long Range Planning Committee that Marjorie chaired. So we started recruiting people to serve on the committee. So we had people who were financial people, people who were business people, people who were ordinary folks in the community, whatever. We broke off into different subsections, okay? So we had people starting to run financial projections and numbers, but it was very preliminary, okay? Marjorie's husband, Morley, was one of the people involved, okay? Jerry Libling, okay, was involved because of his experience as an architect, okay? We had Michael Nozick involved. We had, and a matter of fact, if you talk to people today who are still around, they'll all tell you they were involved. And that's fine, okay? That's fine. Some were a little bit more involved than others. Some were involved in the periphery, okay? The first 2 years, quite frankly, it was me and Marjorie, okay? Primarily. And then once we felt we could then, with some credibility, bring people on board, we started doing that.
So, just to kind of distill, you wanted to get some kind of consensus within the community.
Yeah.
So you're reaching out to as broad a swath.
Right.
But at some point, and I don't want to jump too far ahead.
Yeah.
You have to move forward.
Right.
And even though there's resistance.
Yeah.
Okay. So who?
The resistance slowly began to ebb, and when we
So are we into the 90s yet?
No, we were almost at 1990. I think we recruited Sheldon about 1989, around there.
Yeah.
Okay, and Sheldon, I remember him saying to us two things. Number one, he said, remember Marjorie and I had lunch with him. He said, if I understand how things work with committees and boards and whatever, he said, I have no patience for that. Okay? He said, if I'm going to be involved, he said, you, points to me, you have to be the one to explain to your board, okay, and I'll come to the odd meeting, but I don't want to come to a ton of meetings. I want to have the authority and whatever to move forward and do things. And again, if we have to spend money, we need a board approval, I understand that, but I don't want the politics. Sheldon had no patience for that, okay? So we said, well, Marjorie said, we'll go to the board and we'll go blah, blah. And he said, the other thing I need to know, give me a few weeks. I got to check with people. That is to say, I wanted to talk to people who eventually will need to be on board, one of them being Izzy, okay, and others. And he asked them the question, I've been approached to, sort of be one of the key people in this moving forward. What do you think? When the time comes to raise money, would you support this? Because he didn't want them to say, no, you're out of your fucking mind, okay, and waste a year or two of his time, and then no support, right?
Yeah.
And Sheldon came back to him and said, he spoke to 5 or 6 people, and all of them said, go for it, okay? And that convinced them. And then we picked up on Gary's suggestion. We contacted Kansas City. We said we not only wanted a tour, we wanted to meet with the leadership, what they went through in terms of their issues, even though every community is different, and some of the things they did, their mistakes, their whatever, and they were terrific. We went a second time later, okay? And we really use that as, we like the model. They had set up a separate corporation. We use that as the model to set up a separate campus corporation, so that campus would be run, that is, the facility once built would be properly maintained and managed without getting embroiled in politics, and let the agencies run their programs, whatever. And they were terrific. All their leadership met with us, and it was really an inspiring. And we eventually went, by the way, once we had hired architects, we eventually went elsewhere. We visited 3 places in Florida, actually. It was unbelievable over a period of 2 days.
Were the others on as grand a scale as this turned out to be?
The Kansas City one was, Winnipeg was unique in that we wanted to incorporate our day school. Most of the campuses were primarily nice JCCs, okay?
Yeah.
Some had housing attached to it, or off, detached, but on the site, okay, especially in Florida.
Yeah.
The one campus that included educational facilities was in Boca Raton, okay? And now it's beyond gorgeous, okay? But we went to South Miami, no school. Went to Jacksonville, no school. And the number of stories, Bernie, are just beyond belief.
I can imagine.
Are just beyond belief. How we engaged the feds in what turned out to be the museum.
For the museum, yeah.
How we extracted close to $4 million. And
was that how much they came up with?
I got to tell you this, because we already undertaken.
This was Axworthy, was
Lloyd was the Liberals. We already started the campaign, or were ready to start the campaign, and we're raising money, and there was a federal election. We had earlier retained consultants to lobby the conservatives who were in power, to lobby Jan Johnson, who was the son of the former Lieutenant Governor of Manitoba. Okay, good connections, okay, and taking people out for drinks and all that shit, okay? Anyway, an election call, Lloyd was running in Winnipeg South Center. He committed that if the Liberals were elected, that they would fully support the project, okay? And I remember we were doing projections, and I said the ask should be $4 million, and Richard Croft, then Senator Croft, said to us, that's completely unrealistic. You're not going to get $4 million.
This is
1993, 94, 95, in that range. Okay,
26 years ago.
It's a long
time ago.
Okay. Anyway, the election is held, and just before, okay, we get a note from Ottawa. We're getting money, okay, for the project. This is the last gasp of the government.
The Liberals just get elected?
No, just before the election.
Oh, before the election.
Like maybe a week before the election.
And the Conservatives are still in power?
Conservatives are still in power. We're going to get $300,000.
Oh.
Fuck. Are you kidding? And we're paying a consultant yet, so that's $300,000 gross. Come the election, Liberals are elected, okay? And Lloyd is appointed as senior minister, okay? Which is good news. Anyway, we contacted Lloyd. He's coming into town on whatever date. It was the B'nai B'rith dinner honoring Izzy Asper at the Fairmont Weston Hotel, now the Fairmont. Okay, I'll meet you there. When? Before the dinner. Okay, we'll have a meeting before the dinner. So there was Marjorie, Sheldon, Richard Croft, and me waiting in the lobby, and there was media there already, okay? And he arrives, and he comes into the lobby, and the media are running around, and he's, come on! And we go running into the elevator, okay? Close the door, no media, go up to his room, and he's changing into his tuxedo. It was a black tie dinner, okay? And literally took his pants off. And Marjorie's like, I'll swear to God.
Yeah.
Okay. And Lloyd says, look, we have to have a hook. What's the hook to get government money? Because earlier we went to Western Economic Diversification, and they basically kicked us out of the office. okay, with nothing. What's the hook? He says, for example, are you planning to have a museum in the building? So Sheldon says, well, we have a historical society, and they got some old stuff. We'll hang some stuff on the wall. So he said, no, no, no. I mean a real dedicated space. Then I can try to sell it, okay? Even though the money would go to the to the project, but that would be the argument, okay? So Sheldon said, oh, okay, fine, we'll have a space. He didn't take it that seriously at the time. So he says, and the other thing is, if we get the green light, we have to first do a feasibility study, okay? But we'll pay for it, okay? So it ended up that it cost $100,000 for that feasibility study. That included hiring KPMG to run numbers, architects, designers, and a trip to Washington to see the Holocaust Museum, and to New York to see the Jewish Museum in New York. Okay, I'll never forget. There were two architects from Toronto, not from even Winnipeg, who were designing museums. One was a young woman, not Jewish. We went to the Holocaust Museum. The first thing you do is you go through the children's section, and she had never seen this before. And she came out, she couldn't control her crying. She was bawling. Okay, it was so emotional. Long story short, we ended up getting from the feds $3.5 million. Okay, the $100,000 was the cost of the feasibility study. And we still got the $300,000 from the Conservatives, even though they lost the election.
Oh, that still was
We still
given.
got it.
Oh.
So we ended up getting $3.9 million.
Oh.
I was $100,000 short of my goal of $4 million, by the way. Okay? And we made a deal with the province. Okay? We were looking at different sites, by the way, including a site on Wilkes, just off Waverly.
Wilkes and Waverly. Yeah.
But there were
the hydro
lines.
towers. I remember that.
And
yeah.
Sheldon was like, ah! I said, Sheldon, and we had a public meeting, and the screaming and the yelling that was going on.
Remember, yeah.
And I remember somebody that, I can't remember who it was, said to Sheldon, look, and we hired someone with a Geiger counter.
And this is already 93?
This was already 93, I think. What is the year we got the site? We got the site, we started construction in 95.
Because the province, the province puts out request for proposals for the Fort Osborne Barracks in 94.
Yeah, but what happened was they had a deal earlier, before the 94 request for proposal.
Oh.
There was a deal with a group that included Sept Spivak, who already made a tentative deal to purchase the site, okay, and build condos.
Oh.
Okay? And what happened was, first of all, the market had dipped badly in 92, 93, and they couldn't proceed with the deal. Number two, they had no idea what to do with the historical buildings, because
you were required to preserve the historical nature
right.
of the buildings.
And they didn't really know what to do with
Yeah.
it anyway. But I think it was more the market had softened really badly, and they backed out of the deal, and the government had to put the site back on the market. We had already been someone convinced Sheldon about the hydro line. Said, look, even though the Geiger counter indicated there's more problem in your kitchen with appliances.
Yeah.
He said to Sheldon, look, all we need, God forbid, is one kid in the school gets cancer, whatever, and they'll blame it on the hydro lines, and we'll be dead in the water, okay? So Sheldon, we agreed to move off that, even though the city had offered, it was city-owned land, to basically give it to us for free.
Yeah.
Okay? And then, everything's in the timing. That's when the province put Fort Osborne Barracks back on the market. Okay, after the Sept Spivak group deal had collapsed.
But
okay?
what's amazing is how quickly you moved, though.
We moved. We made a great deal with the province. The deal was that they would value. They had to value the land at market value.
Yeah.
Okay, but it would be through money back to us So we ended up basically getting the site for nothing.
Oh.
Okay, which was fantastic, but there was a significant
And
cost.
Philman would have been the premier at the time, or in the 90s? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
right. But there was a significant cost. It was soil remediation that had to
Yeah.
be. And then there was the issue about what to do with the buildings. Remember, there was a ton of
Yeah,
buildings.
yeah.
There was still the old building that we eventually rented out and got rent from, which is now the site of the new condo.
Yeah, the 139.
Okay, the
Texas,
drill
yeah.
hall.
Yeah.
The government paid us a tremendous amount of rent for a number of years because they had office workers there.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other buildings that had been erected really in the 50s, they agreed could be demolished. Then there was the three main buildings, the old power plant, the school, which is now the school.
Yeah, that was the
old-
agricultural college.
The agricultural college, etc. But the issue, by the way, we didn't have a clue initially what to do with the old power plant. It was old boilers hadn't been working in years. Okay, we eventually turned it into a theater. Okay, but and there were two smokestacks. One was the new that had been. Remember, they stopped using the old boilers years ago, so they put in some new boilers and a big, tall smokestack, which they said could be demolished. But the original smokestack from 1905 had to be retained. Fuck. So we had a meeting with there was a committee of historical people, okay, to appeal the decision, and Sheldon and I came with. We had no pride whatsoever. We came with pictures of the crematorium at Auschwitz.
Oh no!
I swear to God. And you know what? It looks similar.
I'm sure.
And we said, we have Holocaust survivors in our community who would not come here, even once it's finished, because of this. Because when they see this, okay, and they looked at it and said, okay, demolish it.
No.
Anyway, I mean, I said there's a million stories, and by the way, when we were ready, we felt, and by the way, during all this time, we were running numbers, because we knew that the main issue was going to be, we had the community primed, because we had spent 6 fucking years doing this, 7 years. We knew that one of the major questions would be, okay, let's say you raise the money and build whatever you're going to build. Initially, we're just going to build a new JCC. Then we're only going to build a high school. Then it became a JK to 12 school, okay? So the budget kept going from X to Y. What about your operating costs? Okay, how much revenue do you have to generate to pay all the expenses and make sure the building doesn't turn into a shithole in 10 years or 20 years? Because you have to have a preventative maintenance program to keep replacing the carpet and not wait till it wears out completely or whatever, okay? And we kept running the numbers because we had to convince ourselves before we convinced others. The key was the why, okay?
Oh.
The key was the why, because under the deal, the school and the Y, or the Rady Center, was going to pay the bulk of the costs. The office tenants less, obviously, because they were occupying less space. And when we left the Y downtown, there were 600 members. There were nothing.
That's all?
600. And by the way, there was nothing like units. We didn't know from units, okay? There were just individuals, most of them being people who worked near downtown and came to work out at noon hour or whatever. And there were still kids coming.
That's amazing because in the late 40s, it was in the thousands.
I know. 600. We had projected in order to generate enough revenue, and we wanted to be as conservative as possible, okay, in terms of the numbers, that we needed 3,600 members. Now, we didn't get into how many of that would be family units, individual units. We didn't know from units. We just felt we needed 3,600 bodies. And we were told, are you fucking crazy? You're going to go from 600 to 3,600? What are you talking about? We said, well, these are the numbers, okay? By the way, we opened with 5,000, okay? And even though many people, and membership in a fitness center, members are very fickle.
Yeah.
If there's a new fitness
Oh,
center, they're gone.
There's a turnover rate of
I know.
roughly 20%.
I know.
Yeah.
And even though people have died and people have left, we still have 5,000 here at the radio.
Yeah.
We had to blow away the racket courts, as you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Okay. So, how many years later, we still have, give or take, 5,000. Anyway, and that was a challenge.
But the school,
Yeah.
when it opened, had 842 students.
I know.
How many did you plan? How many did you think? It was way more than had ever gone
It
to a
was
school.
way more, but we sort of knew that, see, the initial, and that was our worry also about the radio center. Would it be like, okay, I was excited the first year
Yeah.
or two, and then...
Yeah, the novelty aspect wears off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, fortunately, it didn't at the radio center, and the school for different reasons. Okay. Listen, when I was the first chair of the BJE back in 1980. Okay. When I was the chair of the BJE, we had Ramah, Parachul, Talma Torture, and Joseph Alinsky. Okay.
Yeah.
We had 1,100 students.
When parents torture.
Yeah,
You're a parent school grad. You can
No,
say
I
it.
went to Talma Torture for grades 4, 5, and 6.
Oh, Talma torture.
Okay?
Okay.
So 1,100 kids. Okay? And it's not like all
That's
of
interesting.
the
That's the first time
families
I've
left Winnipeg.
heard anyone put a figure to it. I've always wondered.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
1100, 1980. Yeah.
So now we were squeezing the 800 in because we had a computer room and a science room, blah blah blah, and quite frankly, the ideal number was a little less than 800. Okay, certainly more than 450, whatever. Although this year I understand they're up.
They're up.
They're up.
Yeah.
Okay, which is positive. And by the way, before we actually started the campaign, okay, all these years we knew that we were pretty confident in our numbers, other than prove that you're going to get 3,600 people to join the Y. Okay, we did a feasibility study. Okay, it's one thing to talk to people and schmooze and blah blah blah. Okay, so we hired a guy from New York. His name is Milton Shore. Okay, to do a feasibility study. And one more thing. Even before we hired him, we decided we had to have one more meeting with the machers of the community. Okay, because most of the meetings had been with small groups and individuals. Let's have a bigger meeting with the machers. And we had retained architects who would develop a program, but not, and just general
Is this
floor plans.
GBR?
GBR.
Yeah.
Okay, John Peters
John
Meyer.
Peters
Okay.
Meyer, yeah.
And we said, let's have a presentation. John would make a presentation of the general plans, and we'd talk about numbers, and we had a meeting early in July. People said, what are you doing? People are at the lake. Okay.
This is around what
This
year?
is 1994.
Four. Yeah.
Okay. Just before we started the campaign itself. Okay. And just before the feasibility study. And we had a meeting, and we said, look, if it's important, okay, and people knew about the project, they'll come in from the fucking lake. And they did. The place was packed. Okay. And John made a great presentation, and Sheldon answered questions, and whatever. It was very, very good. And I remember Ed Vicker getting up, and he said, the only thing that Ed was a huge supporter of JNF and Israel projects and whatever. I remember he said, my only concern is this will take some money away from Israel. He says, but if the boys, remember, not the girls, if the boys decide that's what we're going to do, then I'm on side. If the boys decide, okay? So we hired Milton, and Milt said, well, I don't know the people. You're going to have to identify and convince them or tell them what I'm going to do. I'm going to come in. I'll meet them at their home or their office or whatever. No fundraising. Make it very clear, just ask questions and whatever. And he had to come in 2 or 3 different times because he can't see 40 people we identified. You can't see 40 people in a couple of days. So we identified 40 people. And you know how many responses we got? Positive responses, they'll see him? 39.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew, because if you're not interested or you want to avoid, you're busy, you're out of town or whatever, 39 out of 40. Anyway, Milton came back and he said, I'm confident you can raise $10 million. We ended up raising 25, by the way, okay?
Oh, it was 25.
Yeah, and by a little, if we knew we'd had to raise 25.
Wasn't the original cost going to be 18 million?
The original cost only included a JCC, then we added a high school.
Yeah.
And then we said, why just a high school? And then it was JK to 12.
Yeah.
And the project grew, okay?
Did it grow because you were getting more money being pledged?
No, it
or?
grew because as we were through the planning process and our discussions, okay, we were convinced that this would be the focal point of the community. Knew that we knew, and we had people swearing they'll never come here.
Well, at that time,
Because
the
that
population was still about
but it
60-40.
The trend was obvious. Though,
Yeah,
Bertie.
yeah,
The trend was obvious.
Yeah.
And to make believe there would still be a viable elementary school in the North End, and we had to make decisions, okay? And we decided that we would run a JK to 12 school, okay? We put the building on Matheson on the market, and that's a whole other story, by the way. So we brought in
The
Milton.
parent school had already been sold.
The Parachule had already been amalgamated with Talmud Torah, so it was already.
But the one on Jefferson, had been
already
sold.
been disposed of.
Yeah.
That had nothing to do with the campus
Yeah,
project.
right.
Okay. Anyway, one of the people, I don't know if you can use this story or not. One of the people he met to ask questions was Abe Rich, was David Rich's dad. Okay, and in the factory. Okay, Mr. Rich, he knocks on the door. Oh, hello, Mr. Shaw. Come on in. All right, look, I'll give you $25,000. Mr. Rich, it was explained to you. Thank you, but I'm not here to ask you for money. I just want to ask you some questions about the community and the project. All right, sit down, have a seat. He says, asking questions. Look, all right, I'll give you $50,000. Again, Mr. Rich, thank you very, very much. It was, it's so kind of you, but again, it explains. And Rich was looking at him like I'm a chicken. What is I offer the man $50,000, and he's finally it's over. Thank you, Mr. Rich, and I hope to be back in Winnipeg and see you again soon, and whatever. As he takes him to the door, says, "All right. My final offer, $75,000." It was his final offer. Anyway, long story short, unfortunately, Mr. Rich passed away, I think, a year later. And the Rich family ended up contributing $250,000, by the way.
Oh, no.
Okay, but it just showed you that it was just, first of all, that's the way older people like him do business. But the community was primed, okay? We did our homework. Things fell into place, some of which we can't take credit for, okay? But we started construction in 1995.
Okay, here's the question now.
Yeah.
This is because when did Izzy Asper step into the picture in a big way?
Aha!
Because he was a latecomer.
He was a latecomer,
Yeah.
okay? And this is another complete story, okay? Izzy was, first he was on side, and then he believed, and maybe others did too, that the new board, the campus board, would be the ones making all the decisions, okay? So, and he felt that if he was ready to put up, I think, at one time $500,000, and he felt that, as he put it, $1 equals one vote. We were after him for a lot more money than that. What do you mean, Izzy? Well, if I give $500,000, I get 500,000 votes. If this guy gives $1,000, he gets 1,000 votes. So we try to convince them, first of all, this is a community project. Once we build it, we want people to come here, okay? This is their project, okay? Says, okay, I'm gonna have a meeting of the top givers, okay? And we'll hash it out. So we had a meeting in his place. Petersmeyer gave the smaller group another update on the project. Izzy proposed his $1 equals one vote plan, okay? And Jerry Gray at that time says, look, Izzy, if somebody gives $1,000, and that could be a really, really good gift, considering their income and whatever, that gift is as important, if not more important, than your $500,000. We want everybody in the community to be involved in this. He says, come on. He says, I got other people who agree with me, but they're out of town. They're not, whatever. Long story short, and drove Sheldon nuts because they would be having drinks in Palm Beach, Florida, and Izzy would aggravate Sheldon to no end, okay? So one day Sheldon phones me from Palm Beach, and I said, well, what's happening? Oh, fuck, I'm meeting Izzy again tomorrow. He's gonna drive me nuts. We need them. Because he was pulling out. He was not contributing anything.
Oh.
Fuck. So I said, Sheldon, I'll tell you what. Why don't you suggest to Izzy, asking for $2 million, by the way, okay? And now people say, oh, it was a bargain. Well, at that time, $2 million was a lot of money, okay? And tell him he can have 2 people on the board, okay? We were planning a 9-person board, okay? Let him have 2. Because we were convinced that eventually all they would be a board to make sure the carpets were cleaned, that the taxes were paid, and all of that stuff. It wouldn't be like a Rady Center or a federation running the affairs of the community, and that's what it turned out to be, okay? Oh, okay. So the next day they meet, and he says, Izzy, look, we got to put this to bed because he says, I can't, I'm not sleeping at night, okay? He says, here's the deal, $2 million, and you get 2 people on the board, okay? He says, okay, I'll tell you what, let me think about it. He said, I'm gonna prepare a deed of gift, okay? Laying out all the details of this deal, okay? That's how this is the deal. He says, and I'm gonna send it to Richard Leipzig. Richard was his attorney, okay? He says, have Freedman be in Leipzig's office tomorrow. And Izzy, by the way, he would stay up all night. He wouldn't go to sleep, okay? So I went to Richard's office, and at that time there were fax machines, right?
Yeah.
Okay? So we're sitting there, and handwritten, page after page after page, even had what is now the dedication to his parents, okay? With stick people that he had, okay? Okay? It was like a 30-page deed
Well,
of
that's
gift.
what I heard. He took total control.
Well,
but I'm not saying that
but
he
didn't.
wanted total
He didn't.
control.
He wanted total.
He wanted
control.
total control.
But he wrote out the deed of gift, including provision that we could not, any agency could not have a program or promote an event on the campus that was perceived to be anti-Zionist.
Yeah.
Okay. Not that we had planned to, okay, but you never know. Okay, maybe we would have rented space out to Uchbo, okay. He didn't specify who. He just said it, okay, and it was pretty well, with the odd change here or there, non-controversial.
Oh.
Okay, it was non-controversial. Okay, whether having a dedication to his parents, whatever. There would be 2 people on the board. Okay. We agreed there would be 2 Asper nominees. It ended up, by the way, I think they still have 2, but it's nobody of. I think one of them is Leipzig and the other is Mo Levy. It's Leipzig and Asper on the board because they realized it wasn't such a big deal. And Izzy tried in later years to try to convince us to put a hockey arena on. Then he tried to convince us, what do we need kosher for? He likes ribs. Okay.
What about the smoking though?
Huh?
Didn't he want to allow smoking in here?
He was in my office once, and he took out a cigarette, and I said, Izzy, there is no smoking in the... What? He says, you know what? You know what we should have? I want to see, because along Doncaster, there was, prime land and it was visible. A nice restaurant, we can serve ribs. But you know what? A lot of that was, quite frankly, we didn't think that serious.
Okay,
Maybe
but in his deed then,
Yeah.
it stipulated his name goes on the building.
Oh yeah. That was part of the
That was-
deal.
but
For
that's
$2
you
million.
not for $2 million.
Yeah. Sheldon, when he was having cocktails, said for $2 million, Izzy, it would be the Asper Campus, and you'd have 2 people on the board of directors. Okay, and that's when Izzy said, okay, I'm going to start writing out something to fax Richard Leipzig.
What about the architectural design?
Yeah.
Because I heard the story from Barry Steinfeld, and I told this to Marjorie Blankstein too, that when you go up into the area there, the exercise area, and it's 3 degrees warmer than the rest, Barry Steinfeld said that was at Izzy Asper's insistence.
No,
You never heard that?
No.
So he didn't even get involved in the
No.
nitty gritty?
There was a lot of stories about Izzy, but quite frankly,
Yeah.
he didn't play that active of a role. He didn't. I mean, he was supportive, obviously, and the Asper name was attached to it, which is so important.
I know Laurie Mainster and I were working very closely then on publicity, and he said Asper was calling him every day, and he had Lois Schultz as his.
But he would. I know, and he would drive Sheldon nuts, and he would drive me nuts, and he would drive all of us nuts.
Yeah.
But did he actually, was he involved in committee meetings? No.
No.
And did he suggest things?
But I thought it was always his way or the highway approach.
No.
No?
He wanted it that way.
Yeah.
$1 equals 1 vote.
Yeah.
And had we agreed to that, and had he understood at the time that the campus board would be made up only of machers, okay? And it wasn't. We had representatives of the Radies, a representative of the Radies Center and the school and the Federation, and okay. And we hired a building manager, and the building manager looked after a building like they would look after a building, like an apartment block, okay? It really, even initially, never mind to this day, had very little in other than the issue of license fees, which is still an issue, even today, and should be resolved finally one way or the other. But in terms of, do they do anything politically in the community? No. Okay. And Izzy, I thought at that time, and maybe others as well, thought that it would be just made up of all the machers and it would make most of the major decisions. And he wasn't interested in worrying about replacing the carpets. Okay.
No.
Why would he worry about that? Okay.
Well, it's interesting to get that perspective. But just to go back, because it's amazing, because we sort of reached the end, but I want to go back.
Yeah.
So by 1995, you have the plans in place for, or is it still being worked
No,
on?
construction began in 1995.
Yeah.
So we had the plans in place.
So you moved so fast on that.
Well, our visit to Kansas City was 1990.
Yeah.
Okay. We purchased the property.
But because Marjorie also said that you were looking at the Capion Barracks as a possibility, or is that
no,
not really?
No,
okay.
Once we knew we had to move off the Wilkes site,
Yeah.
and then when this came on the
And this
market
is only in
again-
'94, though.
No, this came on the market in '94.
Yeah.
We already were thinking about the Wilkes site in 93, 92, 90. We were looking for sites.
But in terms of the architecture, this was a completely different challenge.
Hey, we had a rendering, Bernie, okay, initial rendering, that had no resemblance to this whatsoever.
Yeah.
Okay, a modern building or two or whatever, people, okay, this was just a rendering, okay. Once we, so the issue was rehabbing and maintaining the historical integrity of these buildings and adding on and blending the new in with the old. Petersmeyer won a national award, by the way, for that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, it was a lot of work.
Was there ever a deadline to get it done by a certain date?
No, there wasn't a deadline, but we had to take advantage of the momentum we felt was, because you never know. We were even thinking of delaying it because there was a bit of a mini recession at that time, okay, and Sheldon was a little worried about whether that would have a serious impact on our
But
fundraising.
I think Marjorie told me that the money was given up front, a lot of the donations. Is that right?
Well,
Or
no.
the pledge, but the pledges were all solid.
Well, we in doing our budgeting, we of course had a line for uncollectible pledges. Okay, we ended up writing off one. What was it? 0.03. I mean, it was minuscule.
So, okay, of the
Minuscule.
25 million that it cost, you got
Okay.
4 million from the feds.
We ended up spending about $28 million.
28, yeah.
Something like that. Okay. And by the way, we needed a bridge loan because pledges were payable over many years,
Yeah.
up to 5 years, by the way. Okay. So we went to the bank, and the bank said, 10 million. What are you asking for? $10 million. What have you got? Collateral? I said, nothing. But here are the names of people supporting the project. Ooh, Asper, Gray, Blankstein, Morantz. Ooh, okay.
Yeah. Was it RBC?
RBC.
Yeah.
Okay, and we got a nice gift from them as well, by the way. And we did pretty well with not-for-profit, non-Jewish owned businesses.
Yeah.
Okay, we did a pretty good job there in terms of getting money from them. We got money from, Marjorie and I went to meet the Bronfmans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was their cousins. Okay, and we had a meeting with Charles Bronfman in his office in Montreal. Okay, and in the morning we got up, we stayed in a hotel, we had breakfast, and Marjorie says, okay, what happens if he says, Marjorie, I get a lot of requests for a lot of projects, okay, why would I support this? And you've got to say to him, if he says that, Charles, I'm your cousin.
Also, they're from Winnipeg.
Huh?
They're from
Of
Winnipeg,
course.
or
Well,
they're
he
from
knows
Manitoba.
That he knows. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So we went to his office. I'll never forget. He had a big black Labrador sitting there. I don't know why I thought maybe he was going to attack us or something. And Marjorie first schmoozing about this cousin and that cousin. Okay. Then she finally talks about the project, and Charles, was hoping that he would contribute $100,000, and we would have a plaque, we'd have dedications, whatever. And he had a pipe. Well, Marjorie, I get a lot of requests from a lot of organizations. Why would I support this? And she says, I'm your cousin. Okay, for that reason, I'll support it. And we got $100,000 from them. Then we went to Toronto to speak to the poor cousin, Edgar Bronfman. Not Edgar, the other one.
Edward, probably.
Edward Bronfman.
Yeah.
The poor Bronfman.
The poor Bronfman.
The poor Bronfman went to his office on the 45th floor. First, when we walked in, oh, Marjorie, Huggy, it's been years since we've seen each other. Oh, wait a minute, they're not that close, I guess. Like, hello. And and he went to the window because it was at a time where there was a mini recession. And he says, Marjorie, it's murder down there. Murder. Okay. Looking out. I don't think anybody jumping out of windows. Okay. So we ended up getting 0 from Edward.
Oh.
0.
Oh.
But 100,000 from Charles. So that was worth the trip. That was worth the
Did
trip.
you tell Edward that you got 100,000? No?
That was the old Lubavitch trick when we used to go and knock on doors. And what are you talking about? Chaim next door gave me $100.
Yeah.
And you only offering 18.
Yeah.
And Chaim would get shit. So I'm giving him $100. So, look, it was probably the most exhilarating thing that, in my experience, and I don't go back 100 years, in this community, the response from people was unbelievable.
So you ended up raising, is it 25 million?
I think it was 28 million.
But including the 4 million from the federal government.
Including,
So
yeah.
it's roughly 24
Yeah,
from
in terms of the
individuals
private
and
sector.
corporations.
Yeah, right.
Private, that's fantastic, yeah.
And at that time, that was a lot of money.
It still is a lot of money.
It still is a lot, but
Yeah.
today's dollars, I
Yeah,
don't know what it'd be
it would be
today's
worth maybe
dollars,
60
but
million.
a
Yeah.
lot more. And what is this, what is this property worth? Okay.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
So.
And we used this as we launched our Grow Winnipeg pro-immigration initiative as a marketing. Who brought people here who came on exploratory trips or whatever, and they were just blown away.
Yeah. It's fabulous too.
So so that was.
So that's the story.
That's the story.
Well, that's great.
It's quite a story.
Okay, that's
and
great.
Marjorie, God bless her.
Yeah.
She's even to this day, unbelievable.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
she's great. Actually.